Welcome to another lecture. In this lecture, I'm going to be discussing the cognitive disabilities frame of reference. I will touch on the main aims for using this frame of reference in occupational therapy. I'll touch on the key assumptions, its merits, its limitations, as well as the client group that we may be able to use the cognitive disabilities frame of reference with in occupational therapy. So this frame of reference was developed by Claudia K. Allen, and it has seen a number of iterations. Initially introduced around the 1960s, and then second iteration 1980s, and then in the 1990s as well. This frame of reference focuses on individuals with cognitive impairments and the impact that the impairments have on people's daily occupations. The cognitive disabilities frame of reference promotes person-centered care, and it also encourages collaborative approaches when working with clients or service users with difficulties with their cognition. The primary goal when using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference in occupational therapy is to enhance an individual's cognitive functioning, to maximize their potential, and improve their ability to participate in their daily occupations, that is, occupations that are meaningful to them. According to Allen, cognitive disability is defined as a limitation in sensory actions originating in the physical or chemical structures of the brain and producing observable and accessible limitations in routine task behavior. Looking at the aims when using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, the first step is to understand the impact of the cognitive impairment on an individual's functioning. And then after that, we then move on to the next step, which is working out the individual's learning capacity. How is their learning like? Is there capacity for us to educate the service user on some of the aspects that relate to their functioning or performance of occupations that are meaningful to them? So this is what the cognitive disabilities frame of reference look at. And the third one is to mesh the person's learning capacity with the environment and the demands of their occupations or tasks. The cognitive disabilities frame of reference has some assumptions. The first one is that cognition underlies all behavior, and there's always a link between brain pathology and functional ability. So in other words, the level of function reflects the level of brain pathology that the person will be having. So that's one assumption for this frame of reference. The severity of impairment can be judged by its impact on the person's ability to think, to do, in other words, to perform occupations as well as to learn. Mild impairment can be managed by learning compensatory strategies. So that's why this frame of reference has got an aspect of educating the client or training the service user. Continuing with the assumptions, cognitive processes and behavioral responses are maximized by utilizing controlled environmental stimuli. So there's an aspect of making use of the environment in order to maximize the cognitive processes as well as the behavioral responses that come as a result of the changes in cognitive processes. Residual ability can and should be used for meaningful occupations. So this frame of reference, similar to the approach with the rehabilitative frame of reference and the compensatory frame of reference, it also looks at maximizing on residual ability. Despite an impairment being permanent, the remaining abilities can still be maximized. If cognition can't be remediated and the person can't adapt, environmental supports can promote quality of life. So this frame of reference looks at individuals with a wide range of cognitive impairment. It has got a broad spectrum that it looks at. up to the extent where a client or a service user is dependent even on all their daily occupations. So what the cognitive disabilities frame of reference looks at doing is to adapt the environment so that we just enhance or maintain an individual's quality of life, despite having maybe profound disability or profound cognitive impairment. Change in cognitive ability is likely to be due to physiological factors. So there's an aspect there of assuming that there is a link to physiological factors. Looking at the merits for this frame of reference, number one, it focuses on function, which is an important part in occupational therapy. It focuses on occupational performance. It provides a structure and a systematic framework for assessing and categorizing cognitive abilities. As you will see, I will present the Allen cognitive levels of functioning. So that provides sort of like a structure, a guiding structure for therapists when working with this frame of reference. The Allen cognitive levels, they offer a guidance for planning interventions that are tailored to the individual's cognitive abilities. The therapist can adapt activities and interventions to the specific cognitive level and personal goal for each individual. This frame of reference also promotes task or occupational analysis because it then guides us on identifying the occupations and how the individual is actually performing those occupations. So we break the occupations into the different building blocks or different steps, and then we see where the limitations are, what the individual is able to do, we maximize on that ability, and what they are not able to do, which is meaningful to them, we then look at ways of compensating for that, or maybe training for that. The limitations for this frame of reference, it is the critics for this particular frame of reference, they say it has got limited applicability to certain populations, so it might not be relevant to a wider range of the service users that we work with. The critics also say it has got limited attention on the emotional and social aspects, as it classifies those cognitive levels, and it mainly links cognition to performance without bringing into consideration other key aspects that may actually influence our behavior or our performance of occupations beyond just cognition. Cognition itself can also be influenced by other aspects. So that's the point that the critics bring out there. Primarily, this frame of reference focuses on cognitive limitations. Some critics say, to some extent, there is a neglect of the environmental factors, even though we know that looking at the literature from the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, there is an aspect of looking at the environment or using environmental stimuli. But nonetheless, some critics feel like the extent to which environmental factors are considered, they are not considered at a good depth. Critics also argue that the classification of the Allen cognitive levels of cognition oversimplifies complexity of cognitive functioning and may not capture the full range of an individual's ability. So those are the limitations that have been documented when using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference in OT. The typical client groups, this frame of reference is commonly used with service users with dementia, service users with learning disabilities, service users with brain injury, organic brain disease, and other conditions that may also affect cognition. So it's then up to the therapist to use their professional and clinical reasoning to make a decision as to whether this frame of reference would be appropriate for their service user. Assessments that are used when using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference. The first one is the Allen's cognitive levels screening tool. This is a leather lacing test and it has got 3 leather tests that increase in complexity. These scores are interpreted basing on the Allen cognitive levels, which I will show in the next slide. There are 6 levels, Allen cognitive level 1 up to Allen cognitive level 6. But the Allen's cognitive level screening tool, it covers from level 3 to level 5.8. And if a service user gets a score of 4.6, or if you score them at level 4.6 and above, then they should be able to live independently. So this is a test that is a standardized test, but it has also been criticized in the sense that sometimes when service users just learn this test, they can actually be able to perform it, and that doesn't necessarily reflect on their overall occupational performance or on their overall engagement in meaningful occupations. But nonetheless, it is a standardized test, and generally, if the level of function is 4.6, an individual is expected to be able to live independently. So here's the Allen cognitive levels, level 1 to 6. So level 1 is focusing on awareness and is broken down to from 1.0 to 1.8, as you can see, with different abilities measured there. Level 2 is about the gross motor movements, scored from 2.0 to 2.8. And level 3 is about manual actions, also graded from 3.0 to 3.8. Level 4 is about familiar activities. So if you look at the what the literature says for the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, when an individual is able to score level 4.6, which is defined as which is named as personalizing, that's the level. From that level upwards, that's where we expect an individual to be able to live independently. And then level 5, it's ability or capacity to learn new activities, also scored from 5.0 to 5.8. And then we have level 6, which is ability to plan new activity, which is level 6, sort of like the optimum level of functioning. There are resources on the Allen Cognitive website, and there are expanded details of the Allen Cognitive levels and performance, as well as levels of care required. So what that resource does is it shows you the cognitive levels, and then it then gives a description of what the individual will be able to do at that level. It also goes on to give you the amount of care or the amount of support required at each of the levels. So it sort of like provides guidance really for therapists to have an idea of what sort of occupations to use, or what sort of support to provide an individual depending on their Allen cognitive level of functioning. So that's one of the strengths of using this frame of reference. I've put a link there which you can access. Continuing with the assessment. So the first assessment was the one for Allen Cognitive Level Screening Tool, but we can also use the abbreviated mental test. This is a simple test to detect the presence of impairment of cognition with only 10 questions. We can also use the routine task inventory, the expanded version. It assesses cognitive levels using routine or daily occupations. There is also the functional independence measure, FIM, which assesses self-care skills in specific areas, for example, eating, dressing, bathing, things like that. We can also use assessment of performance capacity for daily occupations by actually observing individuals performing their daily occupations. Of course, we'll be considering the amount of effort that they are putting, the efficiency in doing that, safety considerations, and the level of independence that they will be demonstrating when they're executing the occupation. Of course, we can also do home or environmental assessments to see whether there can be some changes to the environment to improve a person's quality of life or to enable occupational engagement. The focus when providing interventions using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, the main one is to really promote safety, because we're considering that we are working with service users who've got some form of impairment to their cognition. The focus can also be on adapting the environment to support the individual's cognitive level, providing assistance or cues so that the individual is able to perform as much as possible for themselves. So this frame of reference discourages providing unnecessary support. So the support provided to an individual should just be at the right level. Training and repetition of tasks for those with an ability to learn. So that can also be a focus in the interventions when we're using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, so that an individual is able to establish a routine, or they're able to establish habits, because we know that when an individual is having an established routine or habits, then that participation becomes more automatic. And if it becomes more automatic, then it requires less effort from the individual in order to execute those occupations. The cognitive disabilities frame of reference also advocates for positive risk taking, rather not doing anything, but it's about assessing risk and taking positive risk taking. The possible interventions, it could be advocacy on behalf or together with the service user. It could be education of the service user or their family or the carers or caregivers. It can also be care planning or enablement management plan, putting down a sort of like care plan, identifying the supports that the service user requires, and identify who is the appropriate person to provide that support. And then also it also looks at supporting caregivers. Of course, providing of assistive technology to improve quality of life, as well as environmental modification. So these are some of the possible interventions that we can use with service users when we are using the cognitive disabilities frame of reference, as it can really be used with people with profound cognitive impairment. So it goes all the way to providing 24-hour support. Okay, so this brings me to the end of this short lecture. These are the references that I've used. You can check them. And that's it. Thank you very much.